Well, welcome back to the Emotional Mastery Podcast. Today I have Lindsey Simcik from Almost 30. We're here to talk about being single and how that prepares you for, a conscious, aware, like real, not that other relationships aren't real, but in that sense, awareness relationships. And so I'm just going to give you the floor to introduce yourself to anybody who may not know who you are. And then we'll get into it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I love your show. I'm Lindsey Simcik. I am one half of the Almost 30 podcast. My co-host and I and best friend Krista Williams, we started the show back in our late 20s during our Saturn return when, for most people, it really feels like shit is hitting the fan. Like, you don't know which way is up. And it's like that life freak out where you're like, what am I doing with my life? Why am I with this person? Or where is my person? Or what should I be doing? Career wise, where should I be living? Just kind of having the misalignments become super magnified and it's intense. And so we met during that time and found a lot of, we found a lot of comfort in each other's experience and talking about it and supporting one another. And so we just brought it to the airwaves and started a community knowing that we couldn't be the only ones going through this. And so 7 years later, Almost 30 is a global community. It's a podcast. It's a membership. It's, something we're really, really proud to keep pouring into. We're currently writing our book finally. And it's been such a blessing. And then for me individually, I'm here on the East Coast in Brooklyn with my husband. And I am, I'm in the midst of a lot of, really beautiful change. And I'm thinking about kind of what I'm creating next. And that's always a really exciting period of time for me to tend to. And it's mostly done in private. Eventually it will be shared, but it's just a really, it's something I take very seriously, and tending to it in the everyday has been like kind of a part of my job, if you will. So, yeah, that's me.
Well, thank you. And how do you create and not share? Because I feel like for me, so often I get so excited about it that it's like, ooh, you know?
Yeah. And you know what? I think everyone has a different experience with their expression and creations. And, I had to get really honest with myself about what that felt like for me and what felt most aligned. And in the world in which we live in now with social media, I perceive that people who are creating are sharing right away. They're making so much stuff and then they're sharing and then they're making another thing and they're sharing. And some people do that. I feel like Krista's one of those people. You are one of those people. And I just did not feel good when I was doing that. And what I was missing was for me, the honoring of the creative process. Not to say that you're not honoring the creative process, you're honoring your creative process, but my creative process requires me to go inward, requires me to be with what's being created and unfolding in a very private way. So there are no eyes and ears on it. It's kind of an energy management thing for me. And I just really love the process, like, yes, I love the finished product and it's cool, but the process is the part that I remember. And the process is the part that I learned so much about myself. And so I really enjoy creating in private and not sharing for a bit. And with this particular creation this year, it's going to take a while. Like, it's, and that's a test. That's a test for me to be patient and to plan out accordingly and to, run some trials. And I'm sure there will be errors, and just be with it and not run away when it gets a little frustrating or hard or I feel stuck. So that's something I'm excited about moving through and eventually sharing. But if I don't create that relationship with the thing for a longer period of time, I don't feel as connected to the end product.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's a beautiful process. I feel like sometimes I'm like envious of that because it's like you coming so much into yourself. So you're creating truly for you without any outside voices. And I think sometimes when you're like sharing constantly, you do get that feedback where it's like you have that moment where you have to come back and really be strong in yourself to move
Yeah.
forward with the product or with whatever the end result is, because it's so easy sometimes to get taken away with that. So I think there's
Yes.
beauty in both processes, but yeah, for sure.
Totally. And
And
I learn a lot from people like you who probably produce at a quicker pace where it comes to you, you create it and you share it. I learn a lot. Um, because there are times when I do feel stuck and there are times when I do kind of mull over little details of a creation because I'm kind of like focusing on the perfection of it when that's not really the point. So I I do try to find balance.
mhm.
You know.
Yeah, that Virgo perfection, right?
Yeah, you know it. You
Yeah.
know it.
Ugh. Well, it's so beautiful. I mean, like to have you in front of me too is so cool because I remember like when I was pregnant with my son, who will be 7 this year,
Wow.
I was listening to you guys like on
Mm,
my like first trimester was the worst period of my entire life. But I remember like being at work. I was a photographer at the time. And I would just like be at work in my little like cube with my headphones on, listening to you guys and just like experiencing like all of my pregnancy things. So it's so cool to just like have you here
wow.
now in front of me, and when Krista was on as well. It's very, very
Mm,
cool. I've been single. So my son was 1 when I got divorced with his father. So it was just about 6 years. And it's been such a beautiful process, and it's not always been easy, right? I think we have moments where we're lonely, frustrated, and we have that like desperation energy, where we want the thing and we want to call it in. And so I would love to know just like your story with that. And then I guess like how you move through those specific points, if that's something that you find, as you've worked with people and the sacredness of being single, right? If that's just like a progression that we all sort of go through.
yeah, no, it's a great question. And I was single for about 7 years, starting at age 25, 26. It's a little fuzzy, when you break up with the last one and it like kind of dwindles.
Yeah.
And you're like, when did we actually end?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if God would have been like, hey, so you're gonna be single for 7 years, I would have been like, I'm out. I'm totally out. What do you mean? Um, it was a very interesting period of time. So I was with someone who I thought I was gonna marry. I thought that this was it. He was my person, he was my college sweetheart. And after college, I moved to New York. I was pursuing my acting career. I had like 3 different side jobs. I was working in the bars. I was like I was just doing all these different things, exhausted, trying to make auditions during the day. Um, I was drinking a lot. I wasn't taking care of my body. I was really struggling to pay rent and bills. And so didn't make for, the best partner and the best presence and focus. And then he was in business school, not too far away, but far enough to where it would be, hard and kind of like a long distance relationship. But even before that, I really felt like we were growing in different directions. And I didn't have the tools to communicate how I was feeling. I was afraid to communicate how I was feeling, to be honest. I think it scared me, and it scared me how he would take it. It scared me how our families would take it. And so instead of being mature and having a conversation, I ended up cheating on him, and he found out, and it was just, it blew up. It totally blew up. And after it ended, I went into just like a really dark place. I just remember being so, so sad, so ashamed. I was just like drowning in guilt. I was just kind of disgusted by the person or the actions that I had engaged in. I was like, who is she? And um, that really overtook me for a while, probably about 6 months. And I was drinking a lot, just trying to numb out the pain. Um, and then I kind of did the whole like dating a ton of people in order to then also numb the fact that I don't have someone anymore and I'm so used to having someone. And that didn't work out. I was kind of chasing after the wrong thing because I didn't really feel that good about myself. So what I was chasing was kind of affirming that. Um, and then fast forward, I get an opportunity to move to LA. I, at the time, was working at Soul Cycle. They moved me to LA, and it just felt like I was getting the opportunity to take a really deep breath, a breath that I hadn't taken in a long, long time. So I said yes immediately. And 3 months later, I was living in LA. And while it didn't necessarily get easier, I was able to hear myself again. I was able to like look myself in the mirror. I was able to understand a little bit better the purpose of my past relationship and also why I had cheated and what part of me was really needing the tending and the healing. Um, so this period eventually became like the most important season of my life thus far, because I actually started to, instead of dating a ton of people and sleeping around and all that stuff, I was really dating myself and I was really enjoying like being with me for the first time in a very long time. And that's when everything changed. Instead of feeling shame about parts of me, I really took time to get to know those parts, whether it was through therapy, journaling. I did some medicine ceremonies during that time that just kind of like landed in my lap and it was like the perfect timing. Um, and obviously with my like conversations with Krista and the people that we would meet on the podcast, because we eventually started the podcast. And yeah, I really understood. I was like, wow, okay, like I am tasked, whether it's by God, by the divine, like to be in right relationship with myself before I meet the person that I'm meant to be with, whether for a long time or my whole life. And it had to take that long. I will repeat, I wouldn't have signed up for 7 years, but it had to take that long. Um, and in the Sacredness of Being Single, which is a program that I created in the wake of just this incredible transformative time, I really want to support women and meet them in this season. Whether they just broke up with someone, maybe they've been single their entire lives, maybe they've been single for a long period of time, maybe they're frustrated that they can't find their person. There's so many different flavors of being in this season, and none of them are wrong or bad. But this is a program and community that will support you in very nuanced ways to navigate this time, to come back to yourself and to never leave yourself again, even when you are in relationship, because that's oftentimes when that happens, when you leave yourself and you're like, well, let me compromise. Well, let me focus more on this person. So I'm really proud of it. It's, hundreds of women have gone through the program and really, I think they are their own healers, but this container has offered just kind of like a little ignition to what I think they already knew. And so it's been really beautiful to see them thrive during this time. And a lot of them have found partners and are in healthy relationships. So yeah, it's just been so, so, so beautiful. And now I am married.
Congratulations too.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you had met him, you knew him, right? Before?
Yeah, we've known each other for 10 years. So I met him like when I was first in New York, bartending and waitressing. And yeah, long story short, when I met him, he's very clear and direct, has been since I met him. And that was not the type of guy that I was used to. I was used to guys being like kind of vague, kind of, just, mm, yeah, unclear.
Mhm.
And so for him to approach me, he asked my friend who I worked with, he's like, so is Lindsey single? Like, what's her deal? Like, who is she? And he approached me and he was like, I would love to get to know you. I would love to take you out if you're open to it. And I was like, woo, woo, like no one's ever like said that to me, even though it's so simple. I'm like, oh, like usually it's like some stupid drunken like flirtation, and it's not like a proper like, hi, I see you and I would like to get to know you. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like, so I said yes. And we had a great time, but I was not ready to receive a man like Sean. I was definitely not ready. I had to do a lot of work on myself, and I think he did too, but um he intimidated me a little bit, and I didn't feel worthy of someone like him is what I realized down the road. But then we reconnected in 2019 when we were on tour here in New York. And it's just wild. When we went out to dinner and reconnected, I thought he was still with his ex-girlfriend, so I wasn't really planning on, anything happening, just like we would reconnect as friends every once in a while too. And when he sat down to dinner, I was like, "Oh." And I just realized how different I was. Like all that time had passed, all years of therapy, of experiences, of learnings, like I was like, "Oh, I'm different and I'm experiencing you differently." And it's all clear, and I heard like my spirit team was like, okay,
Mhm.
like this is what it should feel like. It should feel like peace. It should feel like calm. It should feel like home, and that's what it felt like.
That's beautiful. Yeah, so I've been married twice.
Hmm.
I got divorced and then I met my second husband like the month that I moved away with my daughter.
Yep.
But we didn't start anything for a little while. But long story short, so I got pregnant with my son. And so
Uh-huh.
then we got married because I was kind of like, well, I'm pregnant. I don't want to be a single mom of two. Like, what do I do? And then we got divorced. And then I spent like 2 years being single. I had started doing like to be magnetic work. And so I was
Hmm.
writing my manifestation list and all the things. And I called in somebody who literally like matched everything on my list. But just like you were talking about, there was the lack of commitment, the lack of communication, all of these things. But I clung on to that for like 2 years because I was like,
Mm,
this is the best. I am air quoting it, like the best I had received up until that point, because he wasn't unkind, he wasn't like manipulative, but he just wasn't there, right?
yep.
And I was making it easy to continue to show up for very specific reasons, with the alcohol involved and all the things. And that I finally released that, I would say like a year and a half ago,
Hmm.
but I quit drinking 7 months ago. And so it's a really
Congrats.
interesting, yeah, thank you. It's been a really interesting progress or process since then, because it's like I've done so much work on myself, especially that relationship. And I think, relationships are such mirrors for us. And so I learned so much about myself during that like 2 year period with this man. And I don't think that person will ever fully understand how much he healed me. Right. But that was his purpose. But it's been like, since I quit drinking, it's been so confronting because going on dates without alcohol is so
Mm.
foreign. Cause I'm like, then the anxiety comes up and then all the shadows come up. And then I'm like, am I boring? Are you going to want to talk to me? And then I've also noticed my nervous system is more regulated because I'm not
Mm.
anxious from the alcohol, right? I'm not like messing with my system. I'm more tapped in, but that is also foreign to me because I'm
Sure.
so used to that activated nervous system in relationships, right? And I think it comes back to that subconscious belief that like love can't be love unless it's intense and chaotic.
Yes.
So
The nervous system work is so important. I'm so glad
mhm,
you're describing this because it's something we don't think about. I also had to regulate my nervous system when Sean and I started dating this last time around, because it was so not easy, right? There were little like friction moments as we were getting to know each other at this stage in our lives. But like you, I was kind of expecting to be a little bit more I don't know if it was like on edge or activated. Um, and, I can kind of trace it back, whether it's to past relationships, but also to my childhood. And I realized that like this piece is my baseline with him, and it doesn't mean it's not going to fluctuate a little bit during different seasons of our relationship, but that's the baseline. And like that is okay. And that's such a gift. And so it was so much about me connecting with my body in those moments because I could feel myself being activated,
Mm.
and like when we moved in together, there was just a lot of things being activated. And I would have to like take space, maybe take a walk around the block or take a shower and just be like, okay, what is this? What's this feeling? Like, is this feeling young? Is this a new feeling? Is this a feeling that wants to give me a message? I really had to like slow down and be like, whoa, 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 whoa. And I'm curious if you were able to do this, but communicate with the person, and with like first time dates, it's probably not what you do, but communicate like, ooh, like I feel a little activated, or, you know, I'm just going to go to the bathroom, like kind of like excusing yourself, just like noting it so that you remain in your body and you remain in control rather than just like keeping yourself there because you feel like whatever's happening is wrong or weird.
Mhm.
Um, what has been your experience like in real time in those moments?
So like with the guy I was talking about that I dated for a little while, like I think I overshared because I wasn't getting a response. So I was just like dumping on him all the time.
Sure,
But
sure.
again, I learned so much from that. So now I feel like there's one specific example that comes to mind where something didn't happen that I wanted to happen. And so the person left and then I was like going through my mind, right? I was kind of like my whole system was just like, ah. And instead of just like sitting with that, I got on the phone and I was like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. I'm sure that wasn't your intention, but I just want to let you know. And as hard as that was, it was also like very freeing for them to be like, oh, well, I didn't even think about it that way. Like, this is why I did what I did, and it was like so nice to have that conversation where I was like, wow,
Wow.
setting that new baseline of like, this is how it should be, and nothing
Yes.
happened with that person. Like, I didn't continue to see them, but it was just like being able to see that, and sort of like come back to myself and hold my boundaries, because that's a huge one for me. I've always been a huge people pleaser, and I've ended up in not great relationships because I've just like done everything they wanted me to do, even though my whole body was like, no, no, no.
Yeah.
And so being able to actually say no, as hard as it is, and I think that's where the not drinking for me has been so helpful, because it's like every time I go out on a date without alcohol, I'm nervous as hell. Like I show up and I'm just like trying to like pull every tool out of my system, for like nervous regulation. And
Mm-hmm.
then afterwards, though, I feel so empowered where I'm like, I did that. Like I showed up, right? It was like
Yes.
me, the actual like capital S self that showed up in that relationship or in that instance. And even if it turns into nothing, it's still really empowering. And then it allows me to then kind of take that pause and be like, this is actually what I want. How can I communicate this? So,
Yes. Yeah. What I want to highlight about that is oftentimes when people are dating, they're so focused on the other person, how they're reacting. Do they like me? Like different cues from the other person. And what I love about the season and like the habit that you're in now is that you are so tuned in to how you are feeling. And it's almost like however they feel about what I'm kind of bringing doesn't matter as much as how I'm feeling,
mhm.
and I think that's the priority. And honestly, to me, it's felt by the other person that you are someone that is aware, that is able to manage their own energy, that is able to communicate if things, feel a little off, or maybe you're just curious about something. I think that is really the next level of dating, that brings you closer and closer to attracting people who are very much aligned with what you feel that you deserve. So I love that you said that, because that is the key. That's kind of the turning point where we shift the focus from like, will this person like me? What do they think, etc., to like, how do I feel? This just feels a little off. I'm kind of feeling, like we rarely check in with ourselves. We're always basing how we feel on how we're perceiving the other person is experiencing us.
Yeah. And it's taken a long
Yeah,
time
of
to get there.
course.
I'll be 37 next month. So it's like all of this time, but I think it's a beautiful space to be in. And I would be curious if you experience this too. Like, I feel like right now where I'm at too with myself, I'm like so comfortable now. And I almost don't feel like I'm dating. I air quote that, because it's not like I'm dating somebody every week or anything like that.
Sure.
But I almost am like, am I doing it because I feel like I should be doing it? Like, I almost feel really comfortable with myself at this point that there's a small part of me that almost feels worried, where I'm like, am I just going to be cool, like being by myself
Yeah.
forever?
Yeah, that's a very, very, very common question and concern I get in sacredness, like all the time. And I think what it is just a little fear that pops up when you meet another part of yourself that is like really who you are. And really who you are is really comfortable and at peace with being with you. And I think where we get tripped up is that not only are we judging what that means, but we're also like subconsciously or maybe consciously thinking about what other people think of that. We're thinking about how old we are. We're thinking about, um, what our parents expect, what our family, friends expect, what that means if we're not in a relationship. There's just like all of these different influences that kind of orbit and float around. And sometimes they stick and it's like, wait, what is that mine? And I think that's a really sweet spot of a moment, when you realize, like, wow, like actually, if I never find the one, I think I'm going to be okay. And not to say that you're not going to find your person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact that no matter what, you are going to be perfectly okay and at peace and in right relationship with yourself, that is what we're after. That was the turning point for me. I remember it very clearly. I was living in West LA. I was like in my living room on a Friday night. Didn't feel any FOMO. I was just like, I'm going to cook myself some dinner. I'm going to watch the show. I'm going to like paint my nails as I'm doing that. I'm just going to like relax. And I'm so looking forward to it. And I had that feeling where I was like, I'm good. Like I'm good with myself. And like if by chance I don't meet someone, I think I'm going to be okay. And it wasn't like very long after that I actually started to attract a different type of person when I was like kind of open and willing to date. It wasn't the guy that was, kind of confusing and vague in his communication and leading me on. And it was the type of guy that I was like, oh, wow, I actually really appreciate that quality in you and that quality in you. And that's something that I want in a person. Were they my person? No. I had to go through a few, but it was like so reassuring that like the place that I had gotten to within myself was now changing my outward experience in meeting people. And it was just like miraculous. And eventually when Sean came in, it was just like, oh yeah, this is so clear. There was no question. There was absolutely no question. So it actually excites me to hear that you're at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And while the fear is like totally normal and, I wouldn't say to nix it, I would just say to tend to that part, because that part is so sweet. That part is thinking about whether it's what other people think or they're thinking about, but don't let go of your desire to be with someone. It's like, no, no, no. Like, this is bigger than that. Like, I'm good with myself.
Hmm.
I'm good. And that's taken a lot of time and work and growth. And like, that's what you can focus on.
Yeah. Yeah. There's been so many like Friday nights that I'm just in bed after my kids go to bed and I'm like watching like Ted Lasso or just like something or journaling. And I'm like, this is like, I'm totally fine. But I do
Yes.
feel like sometimes that little like voice that comes in. So my grandmother, she and my grandfather, I don't even know when they got divorced. Like they were never together since I ever knew. But
Sure.
she passed away and she was single. So I've never seen her in relationship with anybody. So I think
Hmm.
there's an element where it's like, am I going to end up like that?
Sure.
And being a single mom, there's a piece to it where it's like, I want to provide my children with a man that will be a role model to them,
Yes.
and so it is that external. But when I come back inside, I'm like, no, I'm fine. Like, my kids have my father who shows up for them when they need it, so like they do have that outside of me. And, I think I'm modeling them that they don't need to just like have somebody or you know what I mean? Or like
Yes.
give
Yes.
up themselves for somebody else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, I, I just really believe that the path that you're on is really unique. All of our paths are unique, but it excites me to hear aspects of your story because I don't think we are given these very unique kind of not normal by society standards experiences in order to mm, show a new way, show people what's possible, show your kids what's possible, to show yourself what's possible. And it's a task that not everyone is given. And I think it's really, really special. Um, and I think it's a really beautiful exploration that you're on, especially with kids watching you, and being influenced by you. I think that gives how you show up that much more awareness and consciousness. Um, and I think that will only serve you as you navigate partnership. I I think kids bring us to presence more than anything. And yeah, I don't know. I know it's been highs and lows for you, in these circumstances, but I'm in awe of people who are given these circumstances because it's not by accident. You have everything you need to show up for this and to navigate this and to show again what's possible. It's really beautiful.
Mm, yeah. And I do think that they hold me really accountable, unconsciously just to calling in the correct partner because my daughter's
Yeah,
witnessed, things that she shouldn't have. And so it's like, yeah, that accountability piece to just like do it right this
totally.
time, right? Whatever that means.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's an element of I feel like being a single mom, just like that sort of distracts me a lot of times from having to really sit in the loneliness of like where it can be, right? If I didn't have my
Yeah.
kids. So I think
Yeah.
like the length that it's taking me to get there is probably a little bit longer, maybe because I'm not fully able to always like sit in it and reflect and because I'm just on the go and
Yeah,
but
of course.
being in this space and doing this work and having these conversations with the podcast and being all that stuff is just so beautiful, and there's always a tool in it that I can use and reflect back and work through, pull it through myself. And so I think it's really beautiful, and I can imagine you at the podcast as well, and all the guests that you've had conversations with and all the tools you've been shown was such a help in coming to yourself.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, there were many a conversation during my single season in particular on the podcast that just really, yeah, really shifted the way I thought about myself, about partnership. John Wineland's one of them that we had on a couple times. And at the time I was like dating, yeah, I was just kind of like aimlessly dating and it wasn't very conscious. And he said something that was like very simple but direct. He's like, don't let anyone in, like in, if they do not see you.
Mhm.
And he didn't mean like see you with your eyes. He's like, see you. I was like, oh, wow. Because I was leading with the physical. I was leading with getting intimate very early on as a way to hook them, you know?
Mhm.
And and most of those people did not see me at all. So I
Yeah.
was having just these really kind of fruitless and soul-sucking experiences and wondering why. So that was one that was like, oh yeah. Okay. I totally changed my tune.
Mhm. And how did you, like, if it came up for you, the shadow of, if you're not leading with that being interesting, or, because I think when you, obviously, when you share that first, there's a reason to come back, right? And it's not, like you said, they're not actually seeing you. It's not the right reason. So then when you're not leading with that.
Yeah. I mean, some would argue that, leading with that first doesn't give them a reason to come back. So it just depends,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree with you, but
Mhm.
some people think the other way. Um I had to look at my own self-worth in those moments, because there was a part of me that didn't believe that who I was as like a soul and a personality was enough. I also think that at the time I was attracting people who I knew intuitively were, if we can curse on the show, were
Mhm.
fuckboys. So I knew intuitively that that was kind of their MO. And so I was giving them what they wanted and thinking that I could change them. And you can't. You
Yeah.
can't change
Yeah.
people like that. I think it would have behooved me to reserve the physical side of things, and see if anyone was actually interested in who I am, and then progress to that point of intimacy. Um, and that might have changed some people, but who knows? Um, but it was definitely a part of me that, yeah, both my husband and I too just had some really deep conversations about both of us. Like, I think him as a man, him as a Jamaican man who has been taught that, like, you lead with providing for the family, and also, you know, having women is like a form of status. Um and we've just had a lot of really beautiful conversations around how that has really changed for us, not only in our relationship, but just as we've like grown and experienced the opposite of sleeping around or giving ourselves too soon or being really like casual with sex. Like it's been really cool. And I think we both have changed so much and have really understood intimacy now as not just sex. And it's very cool. I think it's liberated both of us um to really enjoy aspects of one another and ourselves in ways that are just so much deeper and more meaningful, and not putting so much pressure on like, oh, like we have to have sex or we haven't had sex. It's like now it's just so natural. It's like woven into the tapestry of intimacy that we've created, and it's not the only thread of intimacy that we can pull on.
Mhm. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think so many people, like, when I realized this, that I was doing it, I was like, whoa, but like using sex as false intimacy, where it's like, I
Yeah.
wanted so much more than that with the man that I was dating for a while. Like, I would always invite him over for sex. But what I really craved was the touch and the conversation. The sex
Yeah.
wasn't that important. And I realized that after a while. But I think so many people lead with that. And also, um, I, choosing those men that it's just sex also sort of allows you to not be vulnerable, right? So you're
Exactly.
choosing people who allow you to avoid that part of yourself. And so that was also a huge like aha moment for me too. I was like, oh, I'm
Oh,
actually trying to be like dismissive in this situation. So I can pretend like I want more, but really they're making it easy to not. So
spot on. Spot on. I realized that as well. I was avoiding my own ability to be vulnerable and just open. And yeah, it was kind of this false surface level openness, literally openness,
mhm.
So it's like, yeah, I really had to learn that
Yeah.
too.
So now with your husband and when you remet or not remet, but rekindled and started, how like everything that you learned approaching now these conversations in this relationship, were they easier or it was still sort of difficult to navigate those, but just kind of coming into yourself makes it easier?
Yeah. It wasn't easier at first. It was still really clunky on my end.
Mm.
He's someone who really values honesty, communication, and candidly, I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to being open and honest and communicating how I feel in the moment. And I had to kind of dig in a little bit and get honest about like, okay, there are aspects of who I am innately that aren't always going to feel comfortable sharing how I feel in the moment. What I realized is that sometimes I need a moment. I need a moment to come back to how do I really feel? Is this mine? Yes. Okay. It's mine. Like, where does this come from? And it helps me to take a moment, take a pause, and I'll ask for that. I'll just say, hey, I'm going to I would love to just take a time out because I need to understand what's coming up for me and let's come back together in like an hour. And we all can ask for that. I think that's a very responsible thing to do so that we're not reacting, so that we're not dysregulated, so that we don't come out of our bodies and we're like, what are we saying? I don't even know. How am I feeling? And there's this heightened emotion that's just running the show. So I try to come back to like a very neutral place where I'm more understanding of what's coming up. Um, but it was clunky. I realized that I had to share with him very honestly what was hard about this for me. So I had to say to him like, babe, it's really hard for me to understand what I'm feeling when you're right in front of me, like staring at me. Like I kind of need to go inward and regulate and then come back. Babe, it's really hard for me when my emotions are heightened because I feel like I can't speak. I'm just going to cry. Um, and even though it's something that he didn't understand at first, he's come to understand is me. And he's come to understand because I've explained it to him where this comes from. And I've worked on this, a lot. And it's been so cool to see the results. So for example, when we first moved in together, I realized that I was super codependent, where like his moods would dictate how I was feeling. And he can be a moody person. Um, and I love him for that because he just allows himself to be what he is and doesn't really worry too much about how other people might be experiencing it. That could be good in situations most of the time, but sometimes it's like, okay, a little awareness. But I actually really respect it because I'm so not like that. Um, so when he would either be in a mood or just need his alone time, I would sense that and I would take it personally. What did I do? Or like, you don't want to hang out with me? Or, I would just kind of take it to the extreme. And while I wouldn't voice that, my energy said it all. And he picks up on energy very quickly. Um, and it would just create this tension in our environment. And I'm like, oh man, this feeling is so not what I want to be feeling. Um, and eventually we just started speaking to what was happening. So he would say, like, you know, this has nothing to do with you. This has nothing to do with you. I had like something happen at work today and I just kind of need a little time to wind down. And I would say to him, like, okay, okay, like I actually really needed to hear the part about something happened at work today because it helps me to, one, understand and respect where you're coming from, but also helps me to unhook from this pattern that I find myself in, which is like, is it me? So he started to learn that I kind of needed some information in order to regulate. And I learned that if it has to do with me, he's going to tell me. And so I really had to trust that. So both of us were really learning about each other and learning to trust the standards that we've set in our relationship around communication rather than wondering and humming and hawing like, oh gosh, like what is he thinking? Like, I never worry about that anymore. I know he's going to tell me and he'll be really clear. And hopefully he feels the same about me. I feel like it's taken me longer to get to that place because I'm super sensitive and just picking up on so much at all times. But I've gotten a lot better because he's really modeled that for me. Um, I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah. I'd be curious, do you know, are you emotionally defined or is he
emotionally
in human
defined. What do
design?
you mean by
In human design.
oh, I don't know. I'm an emotional authority.
Okay.
What else? What other information do you need?
I was just curious if he was open or undefined in his emotions, or if you were. I just like I've always like hear these little like keywords as I listen to people speak
Yeah.
to things, and but
I can tell you like I'm pulling up my chart. Does it have to do with emotional authority?
well, there's like two layers to emotions, and like when you talk about like him being able to read the energy, like
Yeah.
you know that cognition piece. So like my cognition is feeling, so I would be curious if his was as well, because that you literally feel the energy around you and being able to like
Yeah.
pick up on that, or you know, I mean, we're all just empaths, so it could
Yeah.
be a piece to it too.
I'm signed out of my account, so I can't pull it up.
Oh, okay.
But I will find out. That's really
Mm.
interesting.
Because I think we're always attracting what we're not, right? That's so much a piece of human design is
Oh
that we're
yeah,
always
huge.
looking to fill the things that we're not. And so we're always, you know, that's just like sort of part of it. So he may be undefined emotionally.
I mean, he's definitely
And
emotional.
yeah,
He goes by feeling. So I don't know
okay.
if that answers your question, but
Yeah.
I'll have to look at his chart.
Mm,
He definitely goes by feeling. I think we're both very similar in that sense, but he's a lot more practical.
mm,
And I'm kind of feeling the ethers, I'm like,
yeah.
well, I'm not as
Yeah.
practical.
Yeah.
But yeah,
That
I
makes
definitely
sense.
think I've attracted my opposite in a lot of ways. That's been like the healthiest ever for me.
Hmm. Hmm. What do you feel like in just like looking at your time of being single and in your relationship? What do you feel like has been the biggest lesson for you?
I think my biggest lesson has been around self-worth. Um, I honestly didn't realize that like I had low self-worth. I thought, if you would have asked me like 8, 9 years ago, like, hey, like, do you think you're worthy of X, Y, and Z? Good life, great career, loving partner. I'd be like, yeah, absolutely. I would not have hesitated. But what I realized was that there were a lot of subconscious beliefs that were running the show without me knowing, whether I'd been modeled an unworthiness and it just kind of was a part of my programming, or it was these very poignant life events that um, that really influenced my worth and how I treated myself and what I believed I deserved. And so in dating and in my single period, it was incredibly important that I brought what was running in my subconscious to my consciousness, and was able to look at it and was able to understand its origins. And I was able to, in the moment that maybe that was showing up, catch it, take a breath, kind of run my practices so that that became the new pattern of like, I see that part of me. It's not the one running the show. And just kind of reminding myself who I really am and who I've become. And then in relationship, one of the greatest gifts that Sean has given me is, he saw I believe he saw who I was and so much more than I even realized way back 10 years ago. I believe that's what he saw. And that's why he was attracted to me. And it took me a long time to get to the place where like I saw it in myself. And now in our relationship, even when I forget, like he's constantly reminding me of who I am and what I deserve and what I'm capable of, and I think that's one of like the greatest gifts in a partnership, where your partner can really support and pour into the becoming of like your greatest and highest expression. And they really don't let you settle for anything less. So yeah, it was definitely self-worth. And that's why I love getting older. It's like, it does get better and better. Like I do understand my worth like more and more as each year passes, as more experience, runs through my system. I'm like, yep, I get it. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I would never go back to my 20s. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And I appreciate so much this conversation. And I think that's where I've come to. It's like, just as I get older and the more I understand myself and form that relationship with myself, and being in this single period, it just felt like really important to have the conversation and just to show like, because I think a lot of people have like a fear around being single, and of course like all those subconscious beliefs come up. But yeah, it's just the more that I get to know myself, the more I age, and it is such a beautiful space to be in. And it is a beautiful process to go through. And I'm like, as I'm sitting here, I'm like, everybody needs to be single for like 6-7 years, right? Just to really like fully know who you are so that you can actually show up as you are in relationships. And not that it's easy, because we're all going to be triggered. And I think relationships are mirrors. And if we've had trauma, especially, that comes up in relationships, but just being able to have that space to come back to, be like, no, this is my baseline. This is who I am. And then being able to move from there.
Oh, I completely agree. Yeah. I always like say a prayer whenever someone I know jumps from relationship to relationship. Sometimes it works out beautifully, and most of the time they're carrying the same patterns to the next relationship and not having time to really get honest and look at those pieces that were actually perpetuating something that wasn't working. So I completely agree. Maybe not 6-7 years, because like that seems like a long period of time for a lot of people, but like, hey, let's give it a year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Hey, maybe 2 years, like just really, because once you set the foundation and you click in with yourself and you're like, I will never leave you. Like we are in like this relationship, you and me, sets a tone for every other relationship that we have, and we'll always check each other. It's like that type of understanding and bond with yourself, with your soul. And it's just the best thing ever. It's truly the best thing ever. And that, I think, is the core of what I teach in the sacredness of being single, and it changes your experience with everyone, not just romantic partners.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me. If you want to let everyone know where they can find you, where they can find Sacredness of Being Single, of course, everything will be in the show notes as well.
Thanks for having me. This was so fun. I love this conversation. And yeah, I'm just proud of you. Like, I know you are on your path. It's so obvious. And I'm excited to see just like what's next. So you can find me on Instagram at Lindsey Simcik, Simcik. It's really me in the DMs. So please message me. I would love to chat. And then everything's linked in my bio there. So almost 30, the sacredness of being single. Um, and if you want to join our monthly sacredness circles, but not ready for the program, you can join those circles one-off. And the link is in my bio as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.